So we're going to be explaining today how we accomplish the roof raise, which isn't completely done yet, but is getting pretty close. We fabricated the actual supports for the roof raise long before we actually did the raise itself, and the supports, you can see, are pretty pretty simple. It's just a 9-inch section of 1 3/4 cold roll steel, and then it's got a 15-inch section of 1 1/4 cold roll steel. What is kind of difficult to see is 3 holes, 1/2-inch holes, were drilled in this 1 3/4 square tube, and a plug weld was done and then ground down. So this is actually one piece now. So we end up with this 3-inch nipple on either side. So the sizing for this was determined by what we already have in the bus. And if you look at what we have, we already have this what's called a strut channel here, and there's a 1 1/4 inch gap in there. So it's actually 1 1/2 by 1 1/4, but obviously we have to go with the small dimension, which is where this 1 1/4 inch nipple comes into play. The outside dimension of this strut channel is 1 3/4 square. So that's where the dimension of the thick part, the 1 3/4 tube, comes from. So what we were able to do is effectively eliminate any extra measurements after the roof raise was occurred. We were able to just slot everything in, lower the roof down on top of this, and it made our life a lot easier. There was no guesswork once it was up. It was just a matter of having these in place, which was really nice and why we wanted to go this route. So let's talk about how we actually got the roof up and how we got these in place, because that was the fun stuff. So if you come here, we have our 3/4 thread rod. That's 3 feet long, and we made these brackets out of I believe it was 2 by 2 inch angle iron. And we have our nuts and washers. It's a pretty simple setup. Not too much to it. It was just a matter of trusting it, which was stressful because I didn't completely trust it. But the way we actually effected a raise in the roof was by having all of these nuts tight, except for this bottom one here. So to effect a raise in the roof, we would end up with a loose nut down here and a tight nut here. So essentially what would happen is, as we turn this nut clockwise, as we tightened it, there would be threads coming from the bottom section here and pushing into the middle section, effectively increasing the distance between these two brackets. You might notice that almost all the excess thread is up top. That wasn't like that at the beginning of the raise. All the excess thread was down below. So it was a really interesting process to have these brackets made and installed and used for the roof raise itself. We have 4 points that we had to install these, 1 on each corner. And what that meant for us is we would have to go back and forth between each one and raise them accordingly, so that we didn't end up with a lopsided roof. So we would go about 1 inch at a time, and it was actually really easy. It was a little bit amazed that it worked, but thankfully it did. So this is how we actually got the raise, the roof raised, which was pretty awesome. There was one hiccup, and that hiccup was on this bracket here, all the other brackets were functioning as they were supposed to, but for whatever reason, this bracket, instead of the threads coming from the bottom and moving into the center, the threads were coming from the top and moving into the center. The issue with that is there were only 9 inches of thread up top, and there were 16 inches of thread down below, because we needed to raise the roof a total of about 12¼ inches in order to get these pieces fit in. So we ran out of thread in order to raise the roof in the middle of raising it, and that was a little bit scary. And the way we got around that, which could have been a different way of raising the roof, was actually going to Harbor Freight and picking up this trailer jack. So it's a drop leg trailer jack from Harbor Freight. It's their heavy duty one, whatever that means. And it's rated at 3,500 pounds. It's got a maximum height of 52 inches and a minimum height of 24 inches. So I ran down to Harbor Freight, picked this up, took the plastic cap off the top and welded the square tube here. And then I welded the square tube to the top of one of the window frames. And then the bottom was welded to the bottom of the window frame. So we have this welded into place, and what happens is the middle is actually free floating. There's a pin here that you can put in when you want to set your height, and then this square tube here is free to move around when you actually turn the knob. What's really funny about this setup, this was $50, which is a pretty good price, but what's was really kind of funny is that this is actually operating the same way as our brackets are here. This operates with a threaded rod. I'm pretty sure it's 3/4 as well, and it just moves up and down with a nut. It's the same exact operation. So these brackets, the thread rod was about 11 bucks. The washers are 40 cents each, and we needed 4 of them for each bracket, and the nuts were 50 cents each, and we need 4 of those for each bracket, and then the angle iron was maybe $6 for all of the angle iron we used. So we effectively made 4 brackets, and each bracket costs approximately 15-16 bucks, as opposed to $50 here. So it was a good cheap way for us to work this out. But because this one malfunctioned, we had to end up spending a little more money for this, and what it enabled us to do was actually take the pressure off of this bracket by lifting this slightly, lifting the roof on this corner slightly, and that took the pressure off the nuts on this bracket, and we were actually able to re-thread the rod. So we were able to put the thread where we needed it in order to continue raising the roof. And then we were able to take the pin out of this, so it was just floating here, because without the pin in, it's actually not supporting any weight. And then we continued on the roof raise just as planned. So it was a pretty straightforward process getting ready for the roof raise. Now, that was a little bit of a pain. So essentially, we've talked about moving the roof up, how we supported the roof once it was up, and I guess there's one other aspect that we haven't really touched upon and haven't really addressed. This post going through the middle of the bus, which there are 2 of. This is actually scrap